iQOO 15. If there is a difference, it's probably that the ring-shaped flash on the back has now become a typical RGB light that's more visible on the side. Some of you might care about this change. At the same time, both the middle frame and the back cover use a slightly wrapped design, so there are some related curves. You can see that the curvature of the back cover, under certain lighting, might make you notice some color differences. And because of this slightly curved and wrapped design with the middle frame, there's basically no uncomfortable feeling in the hand. It feels really comfortable to hold. And if you look closely at the bottom, you'll notice something interesting. The two microphones at the bottom are the same ones used in the Vivo X200 Ultra, which means the iQOO 15 is also equipped with two microphones just like the Vivo X200 Ultra. That's definitely a plus. Could it be that iQOO is planning to go truly high-end now? The speakers and the top speaker both use a dual opening design, which isn't really anything new to talk about. This time, compared to the previous generation, both the frame and the back cover are matte. Although the matte back cover might pick up fingerprints a little, it's not that noticeable. Compared to the previous generation, which had a matte frame with a glossy back cover or a glossy frame with a matte back cover, this all-matte body is much better. Overall, it looks very stylish, and the texture and feel in the hand are way better than the last generation. If you don't believe me, you can check it out at a physical store. The difference is really noticeable. Now let's talk about the screen. The iQOO 15 is equipped with the M143 star display, so what about this screen? Right now, among domestic smartphones, this is the first time a domestic phone is using a Samsung 2KM series substrate display. The first impression I got when I held this screen was exactly what everyone has been saying. The bottom bezel is indeed a bit thicker, and compared to the other three sides, it's noticeably wider. A lot of people might care about this issue, and honestly, I do too. My first thought when I got the phone was, why can't all four sides be the same width? At the same time, if you're someone who's particularly sensitive to screens, I really recommend that you go check it out in person. The P-dimming mode on this phone screen is still a bit behind the mainstream high-frequency dimming used by most domestic brands right now. So if your eyes are sensitive, you might notice it and feel a bit uncomfortable. It might feel a bit harsh on the eyes. So if you're someone with sensitive eyes, you should definitely check it out in person before deciding whether to buy it. But I have to say, this screen is really outstanding. When you compare it side by side with the iQOO 13 in stores, you can clearly see that the iQOO 15 screen is much more transparent. Of course, the overall brightness of this phone is also excellent. Even in sunlight mode, everything is still very clear. So for people who work outdoors, you really don't have to worry about anything when using this phone screen. With a lot of previous phones, when I tried to look at the screen under direct sunlight, even if I turned the brightness all the way up or activated the peak brightness, there were still some situations where I just couldn't see clearly. But the iQOO 15 really doesn't have this problem. Even under the blazing sun in Chongqing, you can still see the screen clearly. I'm really satisfied with this aspect. At the same time, this screen also features an ultrasonic fingerprint sensor, which unlocks super fast, and it supports always-on display AOD across the system. If you like this feature, you can set it up just like I did. There's also a really interesting feature, which is the raster drawing. Even when you switch photos from different angles, I find this mode really fun. Of course, this is also a feature of Orange 6.0. Plus, this time Orange 6.0 has added a related mode within the eye protection settings. You can take a look at the smart adjustment of app brightness. For those of you who just got the phone, I recommend that you specifically set up the personalized brightness and smart brightness adjustment options. You might find it works much better. At the same time, they've also added a sharp eye protection mode. Since this phone no longer has a polarizer, it uses a non-polarized dimming method similar to natural light, instead of the so-called original polarized dimming. Also, I didn't see a global high-frequency PWM option in the settings, so we'll have to wait and see if the official team will enable it later on. That will depend on their decision. And according to some bloggers, it uses DC-like dimming at low brightness, and at medium to high brightness, it uses 2160 Hz full high-frequency dimming. A lot of people are complaining about the removal of the polarizer, which brings up a small issue, specifically when the screen is off. You'll clearly notice that the sensor is very visible when the screen is off. This is just like that previous Realme phone screen. But actually, when the screen is on, you can't see it at all. Still, a lot of people might mind this issue. Also, on the back cover near the camera, they've added a sensor-like feature. See, there are two dots here. How you feel about this really depends on your own perspective. Except for a few people with OCD who might check that spot when the screen is off, I don't think it's really a big issue. Plus, removing the polarizer actually brings a good design benefit. First, the color display is more uniform, power consumption is reduced, and the brightness can be adjusted better. So, it's really up to each person how they feel about this. Got it. At the same time, from my current experience using this phone, the auto brightness has a bit of a minor issue, and I hope the official team can push an update to fix it soon. The way it adjusts brightness automatically seems to have some small problems. Of course, I personally recommend everyone turn on the AI reading mode. It might work a bit better. Also, the overall color temperature settings are somewhat similar to those on the Vivo X200 Ultra. If you like that, you can try it out yourself when you get your hands on it. This device, like the entire series, is equipped with what's called an anti-glare AR coating reflective layer. But this time, unlike the ET version of the 13 series, it's actually been treated with a coating process. For the whole series, it's a sticker-type application. This approach has pros and cons compared to a coating. There will be differences on the screen, but if damaged, you won't face issues people complained about online. For example, with the iQOO 13 ET's coating, if damaged and replaced, the new one wouldn't have the coating. That problem is gone. If damaged, just go to after-sales service and have them put on a new sticker or screen protector. However, from my personal perspective, the fingerprint resistance of this screen protector is just average. If it had better fingerprint resistance, I'd say it would be great. The main advantage of this screen protector is that under lighting, its anti-reflective coating is a bit better than what you get on most other phones, so its anti-glare performance is a bit superior. How much that matters really depends on your own preferences. Of course, this screen also performs exceptionally well in very dark environments. Blacks are deep. And in very bright settings, it gets extremely bright, giving you a unique experience either way. And apparently, this time it's equipped with a brand new Synaptics touch control chip, which when I was gaming, as for the overall touch responsiveness, I personally haven't experienced any lag or unresponsiveness so far. The touch response fully meets my needs and is actually quite impressive. If you're someone who has high standards for screens, I think this display is definitely the highlight worth investing in. Of course, if you're particularly sensitive to screens, I'd recommend you try it out for yourself to see if Samsung's so-called dimming mode suit you. Those who are particular about this kind of thing will know what I mean. Samsung's dimming mode really is quite harsh on the eyes. Now let's talk about the speakers on this phone. Apparently, the speakers have been upgraded from the 1115E model on the iQOO 3 to the 1115P model. So, are these speakers really the ones people are talking about online, made by Gore-Tex Acoustics and the same as those in the Honor Magic 6? Is it really the same speaker configuration as the P model, or is it actually a new size? Right now, there aren't any detailed specs released, so I'm not entirely sure either. Also, it's said that an equalizer feature will be pushed out in a future update, especially when driving. It's just so much more convenient. But right now, I've run into a problem. With wireless power banks, specifically the magnetic ones, for some reason my iQOO 15 doesn't seem to be a good fit for them. But when I tested it with the iPhone 16, the power bank could stick on instantly, so it's a bit awkward. It might be that this power bank's magnetic alignment doesn't quite match the official specs. Maybe in the future, the official brand will release a compatible power bank, or people can just buy a magnetic phone case to use with it. This time, the iQOO 15's 100-watt wired fast charging, when you turn on the ultra-fast mode, can actually reach over 50 watts in real-world tests. But if you're charging with the screen on, unlike before when it would drop down to just over 10 watts, now it stays steadily at over 30 watts for fast charging. I really have to give them credit for this. It's definitely an improvement over the past. Before, charging while the screen was on would drop to just over 10 watts, which was really slow. Now, over 30 watts is acceptable. Many are concerned the charging speed dropped from 120 watts on the iQOO 13 to 100 watts on this one. Does this affect real-use charging? Based on my tests using the original charger, charging the iQOO 15 from 1% to 100% with a wired connection, in my actual test with the ultra-fast mode enabled, it took about half an hour to fully charge. If you're charging under normal conditions, it takes about 45 minutes. So, this really depends on your own situation. Of course, charging efficiency also depends on factors like the current temperature, the room temperature, and the environment, so these numbers are just for reference. The iQOO 15 is equipped with a 7,000 mAh battery. So, regarding the battery overall, a lot of people are a bit concerned about the battery life when turning on 2K resolution. I actually tested it myself with 2K and 144Hz enabled. Basically, I turned on everything that could be turned on. If you're curious about how to enable these settings, you can check out my latest video. Basically, for things like screen resolution, I always set it to 2K, and for the screen refresh rate, I turn on everything that can be enabled. So, if I'm just going to work as usual, with light to moderate use, getting through a whole day isn't really a problem. If I use it heavily, then by the time I get back to the office in the afternoon or go home, there's usually about 30% battery left. That's my typical experience from normal heavy use up until now, so you can use that as a reference. I think for light to moderate use, a full day is more than enough, but for heavy use, you'll probably need to charge it twice a day. But this 2 charges a day is based on your usual charging habits. So it really depends on how you look at and consider this issue. Overall, with a 7,000 mAh battery, I'm personally quite satisfied with the battery life. As you all know, I have pretty high standards when it comes to battery life, but during my time using the iQOO 15, its battery life has met my personal needs. Of course, everyone's usage habits and the apps they use are different, so you should rely on your own real-world experience. The video I'm making now is just for your reference. This phone is equipped with the 091640 vibration motor. Among all the upcoming sub-series, this motor is probably the best in terms of hardware. That is, compared to the Redmi K90 series, the Realme GT8 series, and the OnePlus 15 series. Based on my personal hands-on experience with this motor, overall the vibration intensity is pretty good. However, if you set the vibration to the maximum level, you might still feel that it's a bit loose. Of course, that's just based on my personal experience. If your experience is different from mine, I don't think that's a big deal. Also, if you set the vibration to a normal intensity on this device, it's actually quite interesting. For example, right now, even though I don't have vibration enabled when typing, I almost always turn it on when going back. There's also a haptic feedback option in settings. When you press volume up or down repeatedly, you can feel a slight vibration which is set up quite comfortably. Overall, there's not a huge difference in vibration, but I think the manufacturer could still fine-tune it to make it even better. If we compare it to the previous 0916 Turbo, I think it's still a little bit behind the 0916 Turbo. But I have to say, the tuning of the motor this time is much better than the previous iQOO 13. Maybe when the vibration is set to the strongest, there might still be a slight looseness, but there's no denying that this motor is actually really good. Now let's talk about the camera on this phone. Of course, with this so-called 100x zoom, I believe everyone has pretty high expectations for the camera on this phone. When you first saw this phone, you probably noticed something similar on the iQOO 12 before, but the camera performance on the iQOO 12 really impressed a lot of people. People had really high expectations and a great experience. So when the iQOO 15 also started featuring this so-called 100x zoom, a lot of people were definitely curious if it would surpass the iQOO 12. From my current hands-on experience, I can confidently tell you that there is definitely a gap between this and the iQOO 12. As for this device, from my perspective, it should be using the same main camera setup as the Vivo S30 Pro Mini, which is the IMX921 sensor. The ultra-wide is a Samsung JN1, and the telephoto is an IMX882. But this telephoto is different from the one on the Vivo X200S. It doesn't support telephoto macro, so that's a bit of a letdown. So about this phone, its camera settings actually really surprised me when I first got my hands on it. As you can see, it basically has the entire suite from the S30 Pro Mini. Everything like the vivid, natural, and clear textures which everyone already knows about is here. But it even has things like sub-film and main film modes. And there's even the VB film mode. I honestly didn't expect iQOO to include this feature this year. So it's pretty clear that this phone is definitely using some of the algorithms from Vivo's flagship models. And it's got all the features you'd expect, like super moon mode and more. Plus, the camera experience this time is really interesting. It even has these so-called Honor of Kings co-branded dynamic effects, like Li Bai Sun Shangxiang and Hua Mulan. If you're a fan of Honor of Kings, you'll probably love this. Also, let's take a look at the video recording capabilities. It supports up to 8K at 30 frames per second and 4K at 60 frames per second, but not 4K at 120 frames per second. The front camera also supports 4K at 60 frames per second. At the same time, it's got all the expected features like super steady stabilization, and it also has so-called macro mode. But from my experience so far, this macro mode seems to be achieved through cropping. Still, there's something really nice about this macro feature. It offers a lot of focal lengths. As you can see, the macro mode gives you several focal lengths, 1 times, 2.5 times, 2.3 times, 7.5 times, 20 times, 46 times, and even 6 times, 10 times, 14 times, and 6 times. It's up to you whether you find that acceptable. Compared to devices with a dedicated macro lens, especially those with a true telephoto macro, there's still a gap. But I have to say, Vivo's software algorithms do a good job of making up for it, so it's a decent option for those who need it. Good news for macro photography enthusiasts. Next, let's examine its video recording capabilities, both front and rear cameras and photo performance. For those who like the iQOO 15 and anticipate its photography features, this phone's camera performance is definitely top tier in the second tier. It might just barely make it into the first tier, but that's a stretch. Overall, for daily photo taking and social media sharing, there shouldn't be major issues. Currently, I'm using the iQOO 15 to shoot 4K 60 frames per second video with super steady mode enabled. So this is the overall imaging quality you can expect. I'm not sure what you all think of the results, but I personally find the effect to be very impressive. The only thing is, if you're shooting something up close, it does affect the focusing a bit. Overall though, there aren't any major issues. With just a bit of simple color correction, whether you're posting to your social feed or sharing on relevant forums, you can get some really nice shots. Shooting a simple video is no problem at all. Just a little touch-up in post and you can get a great result. Although the iQOO 15's hardware might not have met everyone's expectations, I still think its actual performance is pretty good. Plus, the iQOO 15 makes up for what the iQOO 13 was lacking. The so-called weakness of the periscope lens, but if there's no telephoto, then missing out on macro is also a bit of a letdown. When it comes to handling certain details using a telephoto macro, well, for those who need a telephoto macro, this could be a real pain point. Plus, its macro mode is achieved by cropping. So in certain VG scenarios, its performance isn't that great, but the front-facing beauty filter is honestly a bit over the top. As for its control over details, it's still decent, and the overall background blur is pretty well done. There aren't any major issues when it comes to capturing fine details either. I think in terms of algorithms, iQOO really benefits from Vivo's algorithm, so there's nothing particularly problematic here. Basically, if you buy the iQOO 15 for everyday photography, like taking pictures, posting on your moments, sharing with friends, or capturing beautiful moments, it'll do the job just fine. There really aren't any major issues, especially when you use some of the related filters. It can actually look pretty impressive. From this perspective, the iQOO 15 really does meet the needs of its price range. Even though it might not make it into the very top tier, it's definitely at the top of the second tier, which I think is more than enough for most people. Of course, the signal performance of the iQOO 15 is definitely something everyone cares about. As you can see, I'm currently in an underground parking garage, and right now we're actually testing the iQOO 15 by continuously streaming videos. You can also take a look at its real-time performance here. As you can see, even in a fully enclosed environment like this underground parking garage, its overall signal performance doesn't really have any major issues. Streaming videos is basically extremely smooth. As for making video calls, I won't test that here, but there shouldn't be any significant problems either. Of course, right now we're inside the elevator. You can see we're testing in the elevator to see if there's any lag when streaming videos. You can take a look for yourself. Overall, when it comes to streaming videos, you can see how it performs. Even in the elevator here on site, its performance isn't really any worse than before. So yeah. So, in situations like being in an elevator where the signal isn't great, if it's going to lag, it's still going to lag. But the response does seem a bit quicker. So, it really depends on how you look at it. In elevators and similar situations, you will definitely run into poor network signal. This is actually a common issue for all smartphones, including Huawei phones. They all have this problem. But you can really notice that even after coming out of the elevator, the signal recovers very quickly. It basically gets back to normal almost immediately, and you can start watching videos again without any trouble. So in this regard, I think this might be an advantage of the iQOO 15. Of course, you can test it yourself based on your own situation. As of now, the SIM card I used for testing here is a China Unicom card, so you can also try it out for yourselves. If you're also using a Unicom SIM card, see how well it recovers the signal. As for on high-speed trains, I haven't had the need to take one recently, so I haven't been able to do a real-world test for you in that scenario. But based on its current performance, I think its ability to recover signal is probably much better than before. However, the phone still lags when it comes to connectivity because up to now, there really isn't any phone that can handle these extreme conditions except for Huawei, which does a bit better. All the other phones are pretty much the same in this regard. But as for Wi-Fi in these situations, I personally haven't encountered any major lag or issues with Wi-Fi. If you do run into such problems frequently, I'd suggest you first check if your router is the issue because with these newer models, it's actually pretty rare for the phone itself to have Wi-Fi problems. If your router is fine and other phones work without issues, then maybe you should consider that it could really be a Wi-Fi problem with this phone. But in my experience using the iQOO 15 so far, I haven't had any Wi-Fi issues in these scenarios. So, I don't think you need to worry too much about Wi-Fi. There's basically nothing to be concerned about. Oh, and another thing people tend to worry about, the RGB light on the back of the iQOO 15 now shines out from the side instead of directly from the back. A lot of folks might care about this, but personally, I think this actually looks more stylish and refined. Plus, the official phone case has a corresponding cutout for this, so you don't have to worry about the lighting effect being blocked when the screen is off or when you're using the case. The light will still shine through the gap just fine. I really think there's no need for everyone to worry too much about this. As you can see, it actually looks really nice, and the colors of the rear lighting effects have also been upgraded compared to before. Take a look. What do you all think of this effect? From my perspective, I prefer this more understated vibe rather than the previous more flashy style. Before, the RGB lights were just on the outer layer, and honestly, it looked kind of cheap. But of course, it all comes down to personal preference. As for the adjustments, personally, I really like them a lot. And as you can see, this time there are quite a few more modes compared to the previous generation. How you view this really depends on your own perspective, but for me, I really like this kind of design. It just looks more premium and high-end to me. But that's just my personal opinion. Of course, since the iQOO 15 is a gaming phone, everyone is definitely looking forward to its gaming performance. First, let's talk about the performance of the Q3 custom chip. Here, as you can see, we're testing it with the game Genshin Impact. It supports in-game ray tracing, so we can turn ray tracing off and then on, and you can clearly see the difference. The effect is obvious to the naked eye. Overall, when playing Genshin Impact, the performance is quite smooth. Also, in the settings menu, it supports up to a maximum frame rate of 60 frames per second. Throughout the gameplay, there weren't any major issues, so this is something you can judge for yourself. Including settings like ultra high and others, we can adjust all of these accordingly, and the frame rate can also be set to 60. For settings within the game, I personally recommend that everyone enable touch controls in the performance panel, make sure to set everything to the highest, and also turn on the most mode. This way, the performance will be a bit better. At the same time, after playing Honor of Kings on this device for up to half an hour, there weren't any major issues. But you have to understand one thing. No matter how good the phone's cooling system is, if you're playing games like Genshin Impact, which have high dynamic range and heavy loads, it does get noticeably warm, but not to the point of being hot. There's really no need to use a cooling fan attachment. The gameplay remains very smooth. Overall, there aren't any major issues. From my personal perspective, it's totally fine and there are no problems. In the Fearless Zone, the overall graphics quality supports up to 144 at the highest setting, and smoother balance modes go up to 120. But if you want to set the graphics to ultra high, it only supports a high frame rate, not the highest. League of Legends also supports up to 144 graphics quality. I think that's pretty good. Basically, all the mainstream games that should be supported are covered. As for Delta T cooling, it also supports up to 144 FPS. If you want to set it to medium graphics quality, the frame rate will drop accordingly. In my current experience, this phone is still very smooth for gaming, and there are no major issues with responsiveness or anything like that, especially in FPS games. And for games like Crossfire Mobile, which a lot of people care about, the actual performance now is much better than before. It's no longer the case that iQOO phones can't play Crossfire Mobile. Overall, I personally think there's really no big issue with its gaming performance. Although the iQOO 15 uses the largest cooling plate ever in an iQOO phone, when it comes to heavy load gaming, it's still going to heat up. There's just no way around that. For FPS games like Delta T, from my personal perspective, I strongly recommend that everyone turn on the official Super Resolution mode. You can see that, under the current default frame rate, it basically hovers just above 100 FPS. But when I turn on the normal Super Resolution and Super Frame Rate display modes, after that, you can see that even with all the power saving and stable frame rate options turned on, once Super Resolution and Super Frame Rate are enabled, the frame rate immediately jumps to 144. So for FPS games, my personal suggestion is to turn on the Super Resolution and Super Frame Rate mode. It really does make a noticeable difference. As for games like Genshin Impact and others, when we tested them for everyone, I personally used